and then I will be back shortly to give you the all clear to start the round. This round can go ahead and begin. Thank you for your patience.
All right. We've just received a message to get started. Let's call the case of the estate of Genesis Petrillo versus Peony Estates and Harper Martini. My name is Judge Marilyn Brown. Scoring judges, would you please make sure that your audio and video are off unless you're asked to set them differently? That means the only people on the screen right now are myself and the attorneys. Would the attorneys please make their appearances, with the plaintiff going first?
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Aaron Turner, and along with my co-counsel, Ms. Faith Blank, and Mr. Ricky Hewitt, we will be representing the plaintiff in today's case, which is the estate of Genesis Petrillo.
And defense counsel?
Yes, good morning, Your Honor. May we make appearances?
Please do.
Good morning. My name is Jessica Turner, along with my co-counsel, Cole Metcalf.
Good morning, Your Honor.
And John Paratsky.
Good morning, Your Honor.
We will be representing the defendant, Harper Martini.
All right. Before we take up opening statements, are there any pretrial matters that the parties would like to raise?
Yes, Your Honor. May I begin?
Go ahead.
At this time, may we confirm that Your Honor has received copies of the Midlands Rules of Evidence, relevant case laws, any stipulations, pretrial orders, special instructions, and jury instructions?
I have.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, we would like to invoke Rule 615, which is the constructive sequestration of all witnesses.
That's done.
May we also assume, pursuant to Rule 603, that all witnesses have been pre-sworn before testifying?
Yes.
Furthermore, Your Honor, may we also assume that all objection arguments are being heard constructively outside of the earshot of the jury?
Yes.
We would also like at this time to ask your preference in regards to any screen sharing, as well as turning on and off our cameras for objection arguments.
Keep your cameras on for for the objections, and as far as screen sharing, we'll assume that the ones that have already been admitted can be shared without further permission.
Thank you, Your Honor. We would also like to ask your preference as to whether we need to move to strike objectionable material upon a sustained objection, or may we assume that that has been stricken from the record?
You can assume it has been stricken.
Thank you, Your Honor. Lastly, while asking evidentiary foundation questions, may we assume that the witness constructively has a copy before we screen share the evidence?
Yes.
Then with that, Your Honor, the plaintiff has no further housekeeping matters, and we are ready to proceed.
Before taking up any housekeeping matters the defense may have, which theory of the case is plaintiff proceeding under in this round?
Your Honor, we are pursuing a complaint of battery.
Okay. And any housekeeping matters from the defense side?
Yes, Your Honor. Since this is the first time in a Zoom format, does Your Honor have preferences on standing versus sitting for statements, directs, etc.?
Whatever you're most comfortable with.
And with that, the defense is ready to move on to opening statements.
All right. We'll now hear opening statements from each party. Everyone should make sure that they are in speaker view. That view button is on the upper right-hand side of your screen. Attorneys, please remember to mute your audio when the other attorney is speaking.
Statement, Your Honor.
And you can proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court. Family comes first. But to the defendant in today's case, Genesis Petrillo was never family. She was a problem. Unfortunately, for Genesis's loved one, she was never a problem. In fact, in today's case, you will hear from Casey Soto, Genesis Petrillo's fiance, about how Genesis, or Jen as Casey knew her, was the love of his life. You will hear about how happy they were together, how they had plans for a new life together in France. And then you will hear about how that happy dream came crashing down to earth. You see, for the defendant, family came first, and Genesis Petrillo just didn't fit in that picture. You will hear about how to solve that problem, the defendant, on the night before Genesis and Casey were to be wed, placed organophosphate pesticide, deadly poison, in a bottle of Carl wine and gave it to Genesis Petrillo, ensuring that Jen and only Jen would drink it. And then you will hear from Angel Rodriguez, a friend who was with them the whole night. And Angel will tell you about what should have been one of the happiest evenings of Jen's life and how it went horribly, horribly wrong. You will hear about how Genesis began to become incoherent, how she began to sweat profusely, her body and skin flushing a deep crimson red. And you will hear about how she began to vomit uncontrollably, unable to even stomach a sip of water. You will hear about the desperation Angel felt as her friend got sicker and sicker, and you will hear about how the very last words Jen ever said to her lifelong friend were 911. And then you will hear about how in desperation Angel did just that. She called 911, and how the EMTs had to come and perform CPR on Genesis Petrio's limp body lying there on the floor of the Peony Estates bathroom. And last of all, you will hear from Dr. Jim and Kwan today. Now, Dr. Kwan was the emergency room doctor who worked with Genesis that night. Dr. Kwan will tell you about the deadly struggle that was fought for Jen's life. They will tell you about how it was conclusively with scientific evidence and an organophosphate poisoning. They will tell you about how the wine in Genesis Petrio's stomach tested positive for organophosphates. And they will tell you about how at the very last hour, they administered an antidote, but were just too late. Because Genesis Petrio had a seizure, slipped into a coma, and died early on the morning of what should have been the happiest day of her life. Just like that, Harper's problem was gone. Now, to hold the defendant accountable for this today, we are suing for civil battery. And that means we, the plaintiff, have to prove three things. First, an act. Then, harmful intent. And third, harmful contact. Today, you will hear about how Harper Martini, the defendant, placed organophosphate pesticide in a bottle of wine, ensuring that Jen and only Jen would drink that wine. Then you will hear about how the defendant repeatedly wished that Genesis Petrio would step out of their lives, would disappear, would be taken out the hard way. That's intent. And then last of all, you will hear about how it was conclusively with scientific evidence and an organophosphate poisoning. And that's harmful contact. I think any of us can agree. Now, we, the plaintiff, have to prove this to you, the jury, to a slightly different standard of evidence than you might be expecting. You see, the standard of evidence here in a civil court is actually by a preponderance of the evidence. And what that means for you is that we, the plaintiff, must prove what we allege is more likely than not to be true. That's a 50 plus 1, just a 51% certainty. And I want you to keep that in mind. I want you to keep in mind that what we're looking for is the most likely explanation. And I want you to keep in mind Genesis Petrio lying there alone on her wedding day. And I want you to remember this because the defense is going to come up and they're going to tell you a story. And it might be an interesting one, it might be creative, and it might be fantastical. But I want to remind you last of all that what we're looking for today is not the creative, not the fantastical, but the facts. And the facts in today's case line up with what we have to say. Because what happened that night is family came first, and Genesis had to go. Hold Harper Martini accountable for what he did that night. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Defense counsel, you can proceed when you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. All talk, no action. Now, the plaintiffs just got up here and they told you their side of the story. They told you about brutal hatred that ended with a father poisoning their only child's fiance. But members of the jury, that isn't the real story. And that isn't the real Harper Martini. Now, today you're going to be able to get to meet the real Harper Martini. You see, Harper Martini moved here to Midlands in the 80s, and after graduating from Midlands State University, Harper would go on to work in the winemaking industry. Harper would begin work early in the mornings, and he would work hard into the night. And Harper Martini worked so hard for two important reasons. So he could one day open up his very own winery right here in Midlands, and so he could give his only child, Casey Soto, the life he thought they deserved. You see, the evidence will show that Harper loved both his only child and his winery. And now he would never do anything to intentionally harm either of them. Now, on July 18th, 2018, Genesis Petrillo proposed to Casey Soto. And after Harper offered to pay for a significant portion of the wedding, Harper, Genesis, and Casey all began wedding preparations. And in fact, you will hear from the wedding planner today, Blair Osborne. Now, Blair will be able to tell you about the bickering that she heard between Genesis and Harper. But more importantly, members of the jury, Blair will be able to tell you that Harper Martini was all talk, no action, and how Harper would never intentionally harm Genesis. Now, the wedding rehearsal was scheduled to take place on June 7th, 2019, with the wedding planned the next day. Now, the evidence will show that on that night, Harper presented Genesis with a bottle of 2019 Cara. The evidence will show that Harper presented this bottle of Cara in front of the entire wedding party, including their only child, Casey. Now, unfortunately, this bottle had been contaminated with pesticide, and Genesis tragically passed away the next morning. But members of the jury, the evidence will show that not one single witness saw Harper Martini place pesticides into that bottle of wine. Now, you'll hear from Harper Martini today. Harper will be able to tell you best about the relationship that he had with both Genesis and Casey. And importantly, members of the jury, Harper will be able to tell you that his relationship with Genesis was all talk, and how he would never take action to intentionally harm Genesis. Now, finally, members of the jury, the evidence will show that Peony Estates, Harper's own winery, has been in jeopardy since the cancellation of the wedding. Not only has Harper's relationship with his only child been strained, Harper's now in jeopardy of losing his only business. And that's why you'll hear today from Austin Lewis, an employee of Peony Estates, who will tell you about the situation that has occurred at Peony Estates after the tragedy. Now, members of the jury, the plaintiff has brought forth a charge of civil battery, which means that they have the burden of proof today. And that means that they must prove to you by a preponderance of the evidence, meaning more likely than not, that Harper Martini intentionally poisoned that bottle of 2019 Cara with an intent to cause harmful or offensive contact to Genesis Petrillo. And members of the jury, I am confident that they'll be unable to meet this burden. And that's why at the end of today's trial, my co-counsel, Mr. Paratsky, will stand before you today. And Mr. Paratsky will ask that you find the only just verdict in today's case. He will ask that you find Harper Martini not liable because Harper Martini was all talk and no action. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Before the plaintiff calls its first witness, I would ask everyone to go ahead and switch to gallery view. That will allow you to see the attorneys and the witness at the same time. Plaintiff's counsel, let me know when you and your witness are ready.
Yes, Your Honor, the plaintiff is ready.
All right, go ahead and proceed.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff calls Casey Soto to the stand. May I proceed, Your Honor?
Go right ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Soto. Would you please introduce yourself to the court?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Casey Soto.
What do you do for a living?
Right now, not much. I just focus on getting through each day.
Mr. Soto, I know that testifying today might be very difficult for you, and if at any time you need to stop and take a break, please just let me know, okay?
Thank you.
Now, I want to start off talking about the relationship between your father and your fiance. When did you first meet Genesis Petrillo?
Well, we first met in 2012, and it was really love at first sight. We were dating by the end of the month. We were inseparable.
Now, did you introduce Jen to your father in that first month?
No. My dad, he can be a lot to handle, so I didn't bring Jen around until 2015, right after my dad opened Peony Estates.
What do you mean your dad could be a lot?
Well, you have to understand, I'm all that he has left. He tells me so all the time. So bringing someone else into that equation it's not necessarily the best thing to do.
And how did you being all he has left impact your relationship with him?
Well, he always tried to do what he thought was best for me. You know, like when I went to college, he would bring me snacks every weekend and ask who I was hanging out with. And I'm sure you understand it was too much. He took it too far. It wasn't what was best for me.
Now, when your father did meet Genesis Petrillo, how was that first meeting?
Honestly, not good. I just wanted him to love her as much as I did, but he offered her some wine, and Jen asked if he had anything classier, and my dad, he just got really angry about that.
And as far as you could tell, did the relation?
Speculation.
Could you repeat your objection to make sure I heard it?
Yes, Your Honor. Speculation to how Harper Martini became angry after this incident.
Would you
May I
like-
respond, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
Yes, the witness testified that after Genesis Petrillo insulted the defendant's business, he became visibly agitated and actually verbally agitated as well. He would be able to take that information and say that Harper seemed angry to him.
Objection sustained.
Now I want to move on to talk about your wedding. When were you and Genesis Petrillo engaged?
It was the best day of my life. It was July 18th, 2018. Jen, she proposed to me. She beat me to it by a day, but really I didn't even care. We were so in love, and that's all that really matters, right?
Did you and Jen have any plans for after you were married?
Jen, she'd gotten a job offer in Paris, and we were so excited to move to France, but we didn't want to tell my dad because I thought he might freak out if I told him.
Did your dad ever find out that you were moving to France?
Unfortunately, before we were able to go, Jen, she left him a voicemail and he found out.
What did Jen tell him in this voicemail?
Well, yeah, she spilled our big secret. We were moving to France, and he, just like I thought he would, I was afraid he would get angry, and I think that he was.
What do you mean by your father got angry?
Well,
Objection, Your Honor, again to speculation to Harper Martini getting angry again.
The witness should limit his testimony to anything that he actually perceived or saw and not speculate about how his father felt.
Yes, Your Honor.
Sorry.
Mr. Soto, when your dad found out, did he talk to you about it?
he did something that he almost never does. He screamed at me. He told me that I was terrible for leaving the family and that Jen was ripping us apart. And then he turned his rampage on Jen.
What did he say about Genesis Petrillo?
Well, he told her that whether she moved to France or if she ended up 6 feet under, that I was staying in Midlands.
How did Jen respond to this?
She was scared. She told me she was scared, and I
Objection,
thought that
the statements of Genesis Petrillo hearsay.
Sustained.
Moving on to talk about your rehearsal dinner, Mr. Soto. How were your interactions with your father on that night?
the same. He actually tried to talk me out of the wedding and tried to cancel it. And I was so angry that he would do that. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and he was trying to rip it away from me.
Did your father say anything to Genesis Petrillo?
Well, at the end of the night, everyone was giving toasts, and my dad, he presented Jen with the new vintage of peony wine, and Jen immediately poured herself a glass and began to drink.
Did you see anything else that night, Mr. Soto?
I didn't see much. I went to bed pretty shortly thereafter that, and I kissed Jen goodnight, and I wish I knew that was going to be the last time I ever saw her, else I never would have let her go.
Mr. Soto, we're almost done. Do you think that your father could have hurt Genesis Petrillo?
Look,
Objection, Your Honor. This question calls for speculation and improper lay opinion.
Response, Your Honor?
Your response?
As to the 701 objection, we're simply asking for his rationally based perception. This is related to no specialized knowledge, so it would be a proper lay opinion. And as to speculation, we are not asking Mr. Soto to speculate to the mindset of Harper Martini. I did not say, did your father do this, or did your father want to do this? We're asking about his impressions of his father, a person he's incredibly close with.
I'll overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Soto, would you like me to repeat the question?
Please.
Do you think your father could have hurt Genesis Petrillo?
Look, I don't want to think that my only parent, my father, is some kind of murderer.
Mr. Soto, I'm going to need you to answer my question. Do you think that your father could have hurt Genesis Petrillo?
Objection, Your Honor. It's been answered.
Sustained.
Mr. Soto, how has this tragedy impacted your relationship with your father?
I don't trust him. He hated Genesis, and I can't trust him anymore.
Your Honor, I pass the witness.
Your witness.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Soto, I know this is difficult, but I'm going to ask you a few questions today. And I want to start right where you left off on direct examination. You can't believe that your father, Harper, would actually kill Genesis, right?
No, I don't want to believe. I don't know what to believe.
Now, I want to start by talking about your relationship with your father, Harper. You would agree with me that Harper raised you alone, right?
Yes.
And as you mentioned earlier, you were Harper's only family.
Yes.
And Harper wanted to host your wedding at his winery, Peony Estates, right?
Yeah, we had tried to have the wedding elsewhere, but Harper was incessant upon having it at his winery, so we obliged.
And your father expressed to you how much he needed good publicity for the winery, right?
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay as to Harper Martini expressing that he wanted good publicity for the wedding.
Your Honor, if I may.
I'm going to sustain that one.
Sure. Now, a big, perfect wedding would have helped business at Peony Estates, right?
I don't know. I don't run Peony Estates. I have just a wedding. They host weddings all the time.
Well, you did end up having your wedding at Peony Estates.
Yeah, because my father begged us to.
And you did have concerns about having your wedding at Peony Estates because of pesticide issues, right?
Yes, we did.
You would agree with me that prior to the wedding, you learned that there was a massive leak in the Peony Estate storage barn.
My father had told me something along those lines. Yes.
And having worked there, you're familiar with the kinds of things that get stored in that storage barn.
Yes.
Among the things that get stored in that barn are pesticides.
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance may be heard.
Yes.
What Peony Estates does or does not store in their storage barn has no bearing on the elements in today's case. It makes no fact more or less likely.
Your Honor, if I may.
Yes.
This line of questioning is going directly into causality in today's case. The plaintiff has to prove to you that poisoning that bottle of wine is what actually caused harm to Genesis. We are simply using this line of testimony to state that there are other ways that that bottle of wine could have become contaminated. As such, this is extremely relevant for today's case.
May I respond, Your Honor? I would ask that opposing counsel lay foundation that the shed in question has any relevance to today's case, that has any connection to the wine in question. Otherwise, I do not see how this line of questioning is relevant.
I'll allow it.
Now, again, Mr. Soto, you are aware of the things that get stored in that barn are pesticides, right?
Yeah, among other things, yes.
And you learned that since there was a leak in the storage barn, these pesticides were going to have to be moved to the bottling area.
They had to get moved to the largest facility, which was the bottling area and the casking area, yes.
Right. But you eventually did decide to have your wedding rehearsal and wedding at Peony Estates.
Yeah, my dad, he told me that it wasn't a real problem and that the only things that they needed to do were like put up signs about washing hands, which I saw go up, so I really wasn't concerned.
Right. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about that wedding rehearsal. During the rehearsal, Harper gifted Genesis a bottle of Cara wine, right?
Yes.
In fact, Harper made a big show in front of everyone about giving that bottle of wine to Genesis.
Yeah, it didn't seem like something I would have expected my dad to do, given the fact that he didn't really like her very much.
And then Genesis brought the wine back to the table
Yes.
and started pouring multiple glasses.
Yes.
And you don't know who he was pouring those glasses of wine for.
I'm sorry. You talking about Genesis?
Genesis, yes.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know who she was pouring those glasses for.
Yeah,
I know that one was for herself.
And Harper never stopped her from pouring these glasses of wine.
No.
And you were sitting right next to Genesis, right?
No, it's a bottle of wine. It's meant to be drank.
But that's a yes to my question. You were sitting next to Genesis, right?
Yeah.
And at no point during the wedding rehearsal did you see Harper tamper with that bottle of Cara wine?
I only saw it when she brought it out, so I don't know for the rest of the rehearsal, but after I saw the bottle for the first time, no.
Right. So you never saw Harper open that bottle of wine.
Again, no. I just saw her bring it out and give it to Jen.
And you never saw Harper put pesticides in that bottle of wine.
I cannot imagine what I would have done if I saw that.
Right. You actually never even saw Harper handle pesticides at all that night, did you?
I'm sorry, you cut out there in the middle. What did you say?
You never even saw Harper handle pesticides that night, did you?
No.
Thank you. No further questions at this time.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor, I just ask that our witness be excused.
All right, this witness is excused, and plaintiff, you can call your next witness.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff would like to call Ms. Angel Rodriguez to the stand.
All right, it looks like we have everyone present. The witness has been pre-sworn, so you may begin.
All right. Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
My name is Angel Rodriguez.
And what do you do for a living?
I'm a kindergarten teacher at the Rapid River Valley Elementary School. And let me tell you, I just love my job and working with kids.
Now, what's your involvement with today's case?
I was very close friends with Genesis Petrillo. I was actually supposed to be in the wedding party, but of course the wedding never actually happened.
Now, being that you were a part of the wedding party, what was your involvement like with Genesis' wedding?
Oh, I was involved a lot. I was actually the maid of honor. As a school teacher, I just love to talk all things planning, and everything just seemed to be going really well until Harper Martini got involved, and then things started to get really tense.
Now, I want to talk about Harper Martini. What did you observe between Genesis and Harper?
I can't imagine anybody not liking Jen, but the more time I spent with Harper preparing for the wedding, the more it seemed obvious to me that Harper really didn't like Jen.
Objection to speculation.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
The witness merely said that it seemed obvious to them. They're only talking about their perception, so it's not speculation as to Harper's emotions.
If I may be heard on those grounds, Your Honor. I believe that this line of testimony asked Angel Rodriguez to get into the specific mindset of Harper Martini, and thus would be speculation.
Objection is overruled.
Ms. Rodriguez, would you like for me to re-ask the question?
Yes, please.
What did you observe between Genesis and Harper?
Well, I can't imagine anybody not liking Jen, but the more time I spent with Harper, the more it seemed obvious to me that Harper just really didn't like Jen. The two of them were constantly arguing about the planning of the wedding, and especially when we got to the rehearsal dinner.
What were they arguing about on the day of the rehearsal dinner?
Oh, just about everything. I mean, the lighting, the vows, you name it. It was as if my kindergarten students are trying to decide over which color the poster should be.
Now, did Genesis ever confront Harper about any of their disagreements?
Yes, and when Jen confronted Harper, Harper grabbed Jen's arm hard and pulled him into the hallway.
Did you see Genesis after that encounter with Harper?
Yes, and to me, Jen looked terrified. Jen even said to me, I'm afraid that if I'm not careful, Harper's going to kill me.
On the statements of Genesis Petrillo.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Yes.
I believe that hearsay exception 8033, then existing mental condition.
Your response?
Yes, Your Honor. I don't believe enough foundation has been laid to fall under the 8033 exception. If opposing counsel could lay more foundation, I just simply do not see at this time how it would fall under 8033.
Your Honor, may I respond?
I'm going to sustain the objection at this time, but you can attempt to lay a foundation for it.
Ms. Rodriguez, Ms. Rodriguez, you mentioned that Genesis confronted Harper about their disagreement. What did Harper do when Genesis confronted them?
Harper grabbed Jen's arm hard and pulled.
You asked and answered.
Your Honor, may I respond?
I'm going to overrule that objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Rodriguez, would you like for me to re-ask the question?
Yes, please.
What happened when Genesis confronted Harper about their disagreements?
Harper grabbed Jen's arm hard and pulled him into the hallway, and Harper even said to Jen that Jen should just leave and save the family the headache. Otherwise, I will make you disappear.
Now, after that encounter, what did you see Genesis?
Yes, I did. And Jen looked terrified, and Jen even said to me, "I'm afraid if I'm not careful, Harper's going to kill me."
Objection, Your Honor. Again, I re-raise my hearsay objection to the statements of Genesis Petrillo.
Sustained.
Did you see Harper after her encounter with Genesis?
Yes, about an hour before dinner. Harper, it looked like he was headed into the kitchen holding a canister in his hand.
Did you see what the canister was?
Yes, I saw the word pesticide on it. When I asked Harper about it, Harper said, "It is for Genesis because Genesis is such a pest."
Now, I want to talk about later on that same day, the night of the rehearsal dinner. Could you tell us what happened at around 10 p.m.?
Harper came out and presented Jen with a bottle of wine. It was a complete pivot from earlier, since earlier on in the evening, Harper just kept making a point of mocking Jen and calling her a problem child.
Did you see what kind of wine Harper gave to Genesis?
Yes, it was called Cara wine.
And did the rest of the wedding party receive any gifts of wine as well?
Yes, but we were gifted with a different type of wine called Horizon. Jen, she was the only one to actually receive the bottle of Cara.
Did you ever see Genesis drink from that bottle of Cara?
Yes, and then they offered it to everyone at the wedding table. I was the only one who accepted it, and I took a sip of it and did not swallow it. It tasted really awful, so I spit it out.
And throughout the night, did you ever see Genesis drink any more of that Cara?
Yes, over the next 45 minutes, Genesis drank several more glasses.
Now, could you tell us what happened a little bit later on that night at around 11 p.m.?
After we had all been socializing for a bit, Jen got up to dance, and as soon as she did, it seemed pretty clear to me that Jen was not okay. She was stumbling around. I mean, Jen couldn't even talk right. I was very worried to see her like this, so a little bit later, I ended up taking her up to the bedroom.
And what did you see from Genesis once you took her up to the bedroom?
Jen, she was sweating and she was vomiting. She couldn't even keep water down. It was worse than the flu season at my school. And Jen's skin grew flushed, and right before she passed out, she said 911 to me.
And what did you do about that?
I knew I had to do something, so a little after midnight, I called emergency services and requested medical assistance for Jen.
And what happened once they got there?
The EMTs arrived and they performed CPR on Jen while she was unconscious on the bathroom floor. And then I rode with Jen in the ambulance to the hospital.
Now, after you were at the hospital with Genesis, when did you leave?
I stayed there all night, but the doctors came out around 8 a.m. and they told me that Jen had fallen into a coma, likely due to some kind of poisoning.
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Yes.
I believe hearsay exception 8034, statement made for medical diagnosis, applies to this hearsay statement, which makes it an exception. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you, Your Honor.
That objection is sustained.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, Your Honor. Now, after you, sorry, after you left the hospital, what happened once you got back to Peony Estates?
I ran into Harper in the hallway, and before I even said anything, Harper said to me, Genesis got poisoned. I mean, I just have no idea how Harper could have known at this point, since I was never able to get in contact with the family.
Did you ever find Casey?
I did, and as soon as I did, we both rushed back to the hospital.
And what happened once you got back to the hospital?
Around 9:30 a.m., the doctors came in and they told Casey that Jen had died. That was the most heartbreaking moment of my life.
Now, Ms. Rodriguez, I know that this is hard, but I just have one last question for you. I need you to think back to the night of the rehearsal dinner. Now, was there any instance where you feared for Genesis' safety at any time?
Yes. When Harper said to Jen that Jen should just leave and save the family the headache, otherwise I will make you disappear. I mean, I wish it was all talk and no action, but Jen is gone.
Your Honor, I pass the witness.
All right, your witness.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed? Now, Ms. Rodriguez, you were good friends with both Casey and Genesis beginning in 2016.
Yes.
And you knew that they were planning on getting married in 2019.
Yes.
Specifically, the wedding was planned for June 8th, 2019.
Yes.
Now, I want to talk about something that you talked about on direct. On direct, you talked about how how Harper was seen carrying a can of pesticide into the kitchen.
Yes.
However, you would agree with me that that pesticide can was actually going to be used for killing a cockroach.
Objection, Your Honor, speculation.
I can lay more foundation, Your Honor.
Please do.
Now, Ms. Rodriguez, Harper was the one who told you that this was going to be used to kill a cockroach.
Objection, Your Honor. Here's says to the statements of Harper Martini.
May I respond on those grounds, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, this would fall under exception rule 803.3, then existing mental state of mind. Specifically, this was attesting to Harper Martini's plan in this instance.
That objection is sustained.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, you also talked about on direct how Harper talked about this can of pesticide being for Genesis, supposedly, correct?
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor. Here says to the statements of Harper Martini again.
If I may respond on those grounds, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Rodriguez, like I said, you stated on direct that Harper told you that this can of pesticide was for Genesis.
Yes.
However, you would agree with me that you thought that this was a joke.
At first I did, but I mean, Harper, she seemed really nasty about it.
That's a yes to my question. You originally believed this was a joke by Harper?
Well, that's what Harper said. He made some type of joke about it being for a cockroach.
Well, now I want to talk about the night before the wedding. You were with Genesis for a majority of that evening.
Yes, I was.
You sat beside Genesis during the rehearsal dinner.
Yes, I mean, I was her maid of honor. I was by her side.
Right, and you were actually there when Harper gifted members of the wedding party bottles of wine.
Yes, I was.
And this is when Harper gifted that bottle of Cara wine to Genesis.
Yes.
You would actually agree with me that Genesis felt relieved by this gesture.
At first, I thought
Objection,
that
Your Honor.
did.
This question calls for speculation.
Your response?
Yes, Your Honor. I'm just asking the witness to give her rationally based perception. She is Genesis' maid of honor, and I believe that it is within her rationally based perception to give this testimony.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
The verbiage of the question calls for speculation. They said, was Genesis relieved? And that delves into the mindset of Genesis Petrillo, which is speculation.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor. I'll rephrase. Angel, you believed that you thought that Genesis felt relieved by this gesture.
I mean, at first, Jen had been dealing with so much with the fighting and the arguing. I think she just wanted to take a break.
Well, now, Genesis actually offered a glass of Cara to everyone at that table.
Yes, but like I said on my direct, I was the only one who actually accepted the wine.
Right, but you would agree with me, Angel, that Harper didn't stop Genesis from offering glasses to other members of the wedding party.
Not that I could see.
And like you said on direct, you even had a small sip of this wine.
Yes, but I mean, I did not swallow it at all.
Now, you state that around 11 p.m. is when you could tell something was wrong with Genesis, correct?
Yes,
You noticed that she had a lack of coordination
yes,
and she had slurred speech?
yes.
Well, in fact, you didn't call 911 at 11 p.m., did you, Miss Rodriguez?
No, not at that exact time. It wasn't until Jen got a lot worse that I thought I should call 911.
Right. Well, despite being supposedly confident that Genesis was acting out of the ordinary at 11 p.m., you actually wouldn't end up calling the police until 12:42 a.m.
Well, like I said, it wasn't until Jen actually passed out and that it became evident that she needed help.
Yes, Miss Rodriguez. Now, you talked on direct about going to the hospital.
Objection, Your Honor. Attorney testifying.
Overruled.
Miss Rodriguez, again, you talked about going to the hospital with Genesis on direct,
Yes,
and you took a ride share back to Peony Estates from the hospital.
yes.
Now, on direct, you stated that before you could even say anything, Harper told you that Genesis got poisoned.
Yes.
But Angel, you would agree with me that you're a little hungover at this point.
I was a little hungover as well as exhausted. I mean, I was up all night at the hospital, so worried about Jen.
Right. But Angel, you actually don't know what Genesis meant by poisoned now, do you?
Do I know exactly? No.
Right, because you don't know if Harper was talking about food poisoning.
I don't know. I just know what Harper said to me.
And you don't know if Harper was talking about a drug overdose.
I don't. I mean, again, I just know what Harper said to me.
And you also don't know if Harper might have been talking about alcohol poisoning.
Again, I don't know.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. I simply ask that my witness be allowed to step down.
All right, this witness is excused, and plaintiff, you can call your last witness.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff calls Dr. Jimin Kwan to the stand. May I begin?
Yes.
Good morning, doctor. Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
I'm Dr. Jimin Kwan.
Hi, Dr. Kwan. Could you tell us a little bit about what you do for a living?
Of course. I'm the chief emergency physician over at River Valley Hospital here in Midlands.
What exactly does that job entail?
Well, my team and I are diagnosed with taking care of all ER patients to make sure that they are quickly and accurately treated to provide them with the highest quality of care.
What education do you have that qualifies you for this position?
I earned my BS in biology from the Georgia Institute of Technology. From there, I attended UNC Chapel Hill, where I earned my medical degree. From there, I completed my residency at Emory, and I've since completed 2 fellowships in emergency medicine and medical toxicology.
What exactly, for the jury, what exactly is medical toxicology?
Medical toxicology is the science of detecting, diagnosing, and treating poisons and toxins.
And last of all, do you serve on any boards?
I am a proud member of the American Medical Association, as well as the president of the Midlands Toxicology Society.
So specifically to today's case, did you rely upon reasonable facts and data?
Yes, I did.
Did you rely upon methods used by other experts in your field?
Yes, sir. I use the ACT method, ACTT. It stands for assess. We assess the patient's needs, provide any care, because time is of the essence in emergency medicine. Then we test anything we may need to test, and then we treat.
And is that relied upon by other experts in your field?
Yes, sir.
And does it have a known error rate?
Yes, sir. I can provide all my conclusions with a degree of scientific certainty.
Thank you, doctor. And would you say that you reliably applied this methods to those facts and data?
Yes, sir.
All right. And would you say that your conclusion is the result of the reliable application of this method to those facts and data?
Yes.
Thank you, doctor. With that out of the way, I'd like to talk about how you're involved in today's case. So when did you first come into contact with Genesis Petrillo?
I was the doctor who was assigned to her case when she entered the ER.
At that time, could you please describe her condition at that time?
Of course. The person that she came in with said that she had been sweating.
Objection to improper expert opinion. May I be heard?
Yes.
Now, under Rule 702, experts have to qualify under Rules A, B, C, and D. And I do not believe that B, sufficient facts and data, has been properly met. We heard there were facts and data, however, we did not hear specifically what those were. And because of that, the right foundation has not been laid for this witness to testify as an expert.
I believe the question was calling for her observation of the condition of Genesis at the time that she presented, which I don't think requires an expert foundation, but I will hear that when she does reach other portions of her testimony.
Yes, Your Honor.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
Could you please describe the patient's condition at that time?
Of course. The person that the patient came in with, I believe her name was Angel Rodriguez, informed me that Genesis was sweating and her skin was flushed prior to arriving at the hospital. When she arrived at River Valley Hospital, she was vomiting profusely. She was experiencing chest tightness and stomach cramps.
What was your initial suspicion?
Well, my initial expectation was that Genesis suffered from alcohol poisoning. And, at that point, I still couldn't rule out any other possibilities.
To your knowledge, had the patient been drinking alcohol that night?
Tests later on in the night revealed that Genesis's blood alcohol content, or BAC, was at 0.16%. Now, I know what you're thinking. That does sound extremely high, but it's not nearly as high as it should have been if Genesis actually suffered from alcohol poisoning.
Your Honor, at this time, I would like to erect a demonstrative.
Okay.
And let the record reflect this has been shown previously to the opposing party. So could you please talk us through the examination you performed on the patient?
Of course. A full body examination, it includes checking all the patient's vitals, checking all of their systems, and charting any new or evolving symptoms.
So at that time, what were their symptoms?
At that point, Genesis was still suffering from bronchospasms and other muscle twitches, and I suspected organophosphate poisoning may have been at play.
Why exactly did you suspect that?
Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to re-raise my objection to improper expert opinion.
May I respond, Your Honor?
1 second. I had accidentally muted defense counsel when I meant to unmute myself. Yes, go ahead and respond, please.
Your Honor, I believe that the previous testimony given that all of this is the basis of simply the observations that this witness has made in the course of performing their job as a physician has, along with the other prongs of 702C, 702D, and 702A, that reliable method, that education, in conjunction with these observations, which are, material which is relied upon by other experts in the field, that satisfies 702B and allows the witness to provide an expert testimony to specifically the patient's symptoms which they are observing in real time.
Your Honor, may I be heard on those grounds?
Yes.
This witness specifically said that they suspected an organophosphate pesticide poisoning, which is reaching an expert conclusion, and I do not believe that the proper foundation has been laid under 702, specifically B, sufficient facts and data, to reach that conclusion.
Brief response, Your Honor?
I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. So could you talk us through exactly why you suspected an organophosphate poisoning?
Of course. Bailiff, would you mind skipping ahead about 3 slides? Thank you. So as I was saying, there were 3 main reasons why I suspected organophosphate poisoning. First, the patient's pupils were contracting, and when I shined a light into their eye, the eyes were tearing excessively. The patient was suffering from incontinence and other muscle twitches, and the patient had an extremely slow pulse. Now, all 3 of these together, they're antithetical to anything except for a pesticide poisoning diagnosis.
So could you talk us through what exactly is organophosphate poisoning?
Well, organophosphates are a chemical compound that is found in pesticides, and organophosphate poisoning is when the body consumes lethal amounts of that substance.
And what happens to the body when organophosphate enters the system?
Well, organophosphates inhibit an enzyme called acetylcholinesterase, or ACHE, from reproducing. So when tests flag ACHE levels as being extremely low, it lets doctors know conclusively that there are organophosphates present in the system.
So did you perform any tests to actually test your diagnosis about organophosphates?
I administered the poisons and toxins analysis test on top of the initial toxicology report for the patient.
And would you recognize the results of that test if they were shown to you today in court?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this time, I am displaying Exhibit 5, which has been previously admitted at a previous hearing. Dr. Kwan, what exactly are we looking at here?
This is the toxicology report for Genesis Petrillo.
And could you talk us through what these results mean?
Of course. As you can see, the line item marked acetylcholinesterase, or ACHE, was flagged as being low. That lets me know that there were organophosphates present in Genesis's system.
Thank you, Bailiff. If we could return to that demonstrative. So Dr. Kwan, how can organophosphates enter the system?
The primary ways are through ingestion, inhalation, or absorption. And after reviewing all of Genesis's symptoms, I believe that ingestion was the most common.
And why do you think that?
Well, we tested stomach samples, or excuse me, vomit samples from Genesis's stomach, and it revealed that the wine she had consumed was laced with pesticides.
And did anything else in the stomach contents test positive for pesticides?
No, I reported this on another one of my reports, but all the food remnants, we were able to isolate them, and none of them tested positive for organophosphate.
Okay, thank you, doctor. So circling back to the night in question, can you describe the further progression of the patient's symptoms?
At this point, Genesis was having a lot of trouble breathing, which is a red flag. You know, if my estimates were correct, she was extremely close to death. So I administered an organophosphate antidote.
And was that successful?
Unfortunately not. I was too late. The patient passed away after going into a coma after a seizure around 9:30 in the morning.
So in your expert opinion, doctor, could you talk us through the events that led to Genesis Petrillo's death?
Well, according to all the materials I relied on, including Angel's affidavit, as well as medical readings, sometime before Genesis entered the ER, she was gifted a bottle of wine from Harper Martini, and it is likely that wine that had organophosphates in it. That organophosphate caused Genesis's nervous system to fail, which ultimately led to her death.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan. I pass the witness.
All right, defense counsel, you may begin your questioning.
Dr. Kwan, I want to start off by talking to you a little bit about your initial examination of Ms. Petrillo. When Ms. Petrillo first came in, you learned that she had been at a party.
Yes.
And once at the hospital, Ms. Petrillo exhibited symptoms of nausea.
That is correct.
That is a symptom of alcohol poisoning.
Yes, ma'am.
And Ms. Petrillo was vomiting.
Yes.
That is a symptom of alcohol poisoning.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Petrillo had slurred speech.
At the very beginning, yes.
That is also a symptom of alcohol poisoning.
Yes, ma'am.
And Ms. Petrillo had slower than normal breathing.
Yes.
That is a symptom of alcohol poisoning.
Yes, but she also had a slow pulse later on in the night, which was a red flag for me.
Well, and then when Ms. Petrillo first came in, she also exhibited stomach pain.
Yes, initially.
That is also a symptom of alcohol poisoning.
It can be.
You would agree with me that Ms. Petrillo smelled of wine?
Yes, her breath smelled alcoholic and acidic.
And Ms. Petrillo appeared to be intoxicated?
Yes, she did.
And you tested Ms. Petrillo's vomit?
Yes, I did.
And confirmed that she had been drinking wine?
That is correct. And it was that wine that had the organophosphate in it.
We'll get to that in a second, Dr. Kwan, but first, you would agree with me that you checked Ms. Petrillo's blood alcohol levels?
Yes, ma'am.
And the test was administered at 2:58 a.m. on June 8th?
Yes.
And at that time, Ms. Petrillo had a blood alcohol level of 0.16%.
That is correct.
Which is pretty high.
It's not high enough to cause alcohol poisoning.
Well, Dr. Kwan, you would recognize an alcohol impairment chart if I were to show it to you today.
Yes, ma'am. I provided one as Exhibit 23.
Your Honor, we'll be screen sharing Exhibit 23. And Dr. Kwan, is this that alcohol impairment chart?
Yes, ma'am.
Objection, Your Honor. Actually, I will wait for just a second. I apologize.
Okay, go ahead.
And it is a fair and accurate copy?
Could you scroll down a little bit? Yes, it looks perfect.
And it has not been changed or altered in any way?
No, ma'am.
At this time, this witness has correctly identified Exhibit 23, and the defense now moves to tender it into evidence.
At this time, I do raise my objection to hearsay, Your Honor.
Was this part of the expert's report?
No, Your Honor.
It was used in the expert's report, Your Honor.
Well, was it or was it part of the report, I guess?
It was one of the documents used to make the report.
Okay.
Your Honor, but I would just respond that at no point today has the doctor discussed this. Therefore, it is inherently still an out-of-court statement.
Well, may I respond on those grounds, Your Honor?
I'm going to allow you to question the witness about it if it is something that informed her opinions in this case or her testimony. If you can establish that foundation with her, then I'll allow it.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Dr. Kwan, you reviewed this alcohol impairment chart in preparing for today's case.
Yes, ma'am. We keep those on hand in my department.
Well, now, Dr. Kwan, according to this chart, Ms. Petrillo's blood alcohol level was in the high risk category.
Yes.
And this category includes significant impairment of speech,
Yes, ma'am.
and it makes decision-making extremely impaired.
Yes.
People with this blood alcohol level have memory impairment.
Well, they might, but it really does depend on the person. You know, no two people are affected the same way by alcohol.
But it does say in that section, memory impairment.
Yes, ma'am. But I would argue that that would be on the higher end of the high risk category, so closer to 0.25%.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan. Well, now I want to talk to you about how Ms. Petrillo could have been exposed to the pesticide. You mentioned on direct that there are 3 ways someone can be exposed to pesticide poisoning.
Yes, ma'am.
It can be absorbed through the skin,
Yes.
it can be inhaled,
Yes, or ingested.
or ingested. Now, Dr. Kwan, you were not at the wedding rehearsal that evening, correct?
No, ma'am.
You did not see firsthand what happened.
No, ma'am.
Objection, Your Honor, to relevance to these questions.
I'm going to overrule that objection.
No,
Yes,
ma'am.
Your Honor.
No, ma'am, I wasn't there.
Dr. Kwan, after examining Mr. Petrillo further, you ordered a poisons and toxins analysis.
Yes, ma'am. I did do that for Ms. Petrillo.
And you decided to administer an organophosphate antidote.
Yes, because all of the evidence led me to believe that she was suffering from organophosphate poisoning.
However, a few minutes after administering that antidote, Ms. Petrillo had a coughing fit and a seizure,
Yes, ma'am.
and she fell into a coma.
And she passed away. You know, it really is a tragedy. I was too late.
Well, Dr. Kwan, you administered this antidote before you received the poisons and toxins analysis results, correct?
Yes, ma'am, because all of her symptoms thus far were only consistent with pesticide poisoning.
You would agree with me, Dr. Kwan, that you administered this antidote for something you did not confirm was in her system.
Well, all the symptoms led to organophosphate poisoning, so it was the only viable option. I mean, treating her for anything else would have been unethical.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan. But again, to redirect you to my question, you did not have the results back, so it was not yet confirmed.
It wasn't confirmed, but I was very sure.
Now I want to talk to you about your final diagnosis in this case. You stated on direct that the most likely source of the poisoning was the wine Ms. Petrillo ingested on the evening of June 7th, correct? However, you would agree with me that if Ms. Petrillo had ingested another contaminated food or drink item, aside from the wine, it could have dissolved in Ms. Petrillo's stomach contents.
It's very unlikely. Thankfully, we were able to isolate the wine and food particles in her stomach, and we found that all the food remnants did not have any contaminants or organophosphates.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan. But to redirect you to my question, it is possible that it could have dissolved in Ms. Petrillo's stomach contents.
It's possible, but it is extremely unlikely.
And even more so, the other contaminated food or drink could have combined with the wine.
I would say, considering the time frame, it's unlikely.
But it is a possibility.
Yes, ma'am, anything's a possibility.
Now, Dr. Kwan, you are on the board of directors for Doctors for Organic Solutions, as you mentioned on direct.
Yes, ma'am, I am.
And you advocate against the use of chemical pesticides,
I do.
like the ones used by Peony Estates.
Yes, ma'am, because these injuries, these deaths, they're preventable. And we have a duty as Midland citizens to take care of people.
Exactly. You would agree with me, Dr. Kwan, that you are hopeful this case will help convince your legislators to strongly curtail the use of chemical pesticides.
As unfortunate as this is, I really do hope it opens people's eyes to see that these deaths, they are preventable.
And you are hopeful that this case will actually outright ban the use of pesticides.
I mean, that is my hope, but I in no ways let that affect my testimony or my conclusions today.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan. I have no further questions at this time.
Anything else from the plaintiff?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just will ask that my witness be allowed to step down. And then I would, before we close our case in chief, I would like to read stipulation 9 onto the record.
All right. Any objection from defense counsel?
Just one moment, Your Honor. That's fine with defense, Your Honor.
All right. Plaintiff's counsel, you can go ahead.
Your Honor, pursuant to stipulation 9, all leftover beverages, alcoholic and otherwise, from June 7th, 2019 rehearsal dinner were tested, and those tests found no organophosphate or any other poisons or abnormalities.
Okay.
And with that, Your Honor, the plaintiff rests their case in chief and would request a 5 to 10 minute recess, time permitting.
All right. I believe this is everyone's last round of the day. If the parties would like it and it doesn't present problems for our scoring judges, I have no problem with doing either 5 or 10 minutes. So defense, what would your team like?
We would request a brief 5-minute break.
All right. We will resume in 5 minutes. Everybody
Yes, Your
remember,
Honor.
the live stream will continue, so please mute your audio and stop your videos. All right. I see at least one of my scoring judges is back. Let me make sure my second one is as well before we resume. Let's give it one more second. Okay, we've got both scoring judges, so if the parties are ready, we will resume. As a reminder, we should all be in gallery view when we're calling witnesses. Defense counsel, if you are ready, you can call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense would like to call Harper Martini to the stand.
All right, Mr. Martini, you've been previously sworn, so counsel, you can begin when you're ready.
Good morning. Can you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Hi, I'm Harper Martini, and I'm the owner of Peony Estates Winery right here in Midlands.
And do you know why you're here today, Mr. Martini?
Yeah, someone thinks that I intentionally poisoned the bottle of wine to hurt Genesis, which is absurd. I would never do that.
Well, we'll get to that in a minute, but first I want to talk about Genesis. How did you get along with her?
To be honest, not very well. I mean, from the first time I met her, she started by making rude and disrespectful comments about my business, which actually really hurt my feelings. One of the first times she came to the winery, she poured out a bunch of free samples without even trying it and gagged on them. This type of behavior was, sad to say, typical of Genesis.
And how did you feel about Casey and Genesis' engagement?
At first, I'll admit, I wasn't very happy. I mean, I didn't think that Genesis's negativity would be a good influence on Casey, but I just tried to get along with her and make peace for Casey's sake.
Did you end up getting along with Genesis?
As much as I tried, Genesis, she made it so difficult. The final straw was this. She sent me a voicemail saying that her and Casey were moving to France and that they wanted nothing to do with me and that I would never see her again. I mean, that really hurt. At that point, I just wanted Genesis out of Casey's life.
What did you do to try to get Genesis out of Casey's life?
I actually wrote her a note for a check for $300,000 asking her to leave Casey. Now, I admit this was not a good plan, but it was the only thing I could think of to try to protect my daughter.
Would you recognize that note if I showed it to you today?
Yes, I would.
The defense is now displaying what's been pre-marked as Exhibit 24. Now, Mr. Martini, what have I just handed you?
This is the note that I wrote Genesis asking her to leave Casey.
And is it a fair and accurate copy?
Yes, it looks like it, yes.
Has it been altered or changed in any way?
No.
At this time, the defense moves to enter what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 24 into evidence.
The plaintiff has no objections, Your Honor.
It's admitted.
Now, Mr. Martini, what does this note mean?
Well, it says, leave Casey and the enclosed $300,000 is yours. Otherwise, I will take you out of the picture the hard way. I didn't mean I was going to kill her. I was just trying to scare her away. Honestly, this note, it was all talk and no action. I would never actually hurt Genesis. Never.
Well, did this note work?
No, it didn't. Genesis, she just threw the note right back at me, but kept the money.
How did you react to that?
At first, I was furious, but I just took some time to cool off and think things over, and then something happened later that day. I was getting ready to leave the winery, and I stumbled upon Casey and Genesis. I don't think that they knew that I was there, but I just saw them holding each other in each other's arms, looking over the vineyard, and they looked so happy. And that's when I realized that what I did was wrong and what I needed to do.
What kinds of things did you realize?
Well, first, I realized that it was a mistake to try to break up Genesis and Casey. I mean, all I ever wanted was for Casey to be happy. And just trying to break them up was just going to drive a wedge between me and Casey. And that is the absolute last thing I wanted. So I decided to put all of the scheming behind me and give my son his perfect wedding.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about that wedding. Where were the wedding events supposed to be held?
All of the wedding events were going to be held at Peony Estates, and it was the perfect venue for two main reasons.
What were the two reasons?
Well, first, for sentimental reasons. I mean, I love the idea of Casey getting married at our own vineyard. The only thing that compares to my love for Casey is my love for Peony Estates. Second, we were particularly in need of some good publicity for the winery at the time, and a big, beautiful, perfect wedding covered by the local press was just the best way to do that.
Mr. Martini, why did the winery need positive publicity?
Well, you see, our vineyards, they're right next to some swampland, which contributes to our history of pest problems. Now, at this point, we were working on ways to safely use pesticides in our production, but it was tricky, and we didn't always get the right mix, and we also didn't want the pest problems to harm the romantic image of the vineyard.
Were those pesticides ever sprayed during the production of Cara wine?
Yes, the grapes for Cara, they were harvested in 2018 when we were having some serious pest issues. Now, usually my employee, Austin Lewis, throws out the contaminated grapes, but there was a period of time where Austin was away and the contaminated grapes were not thrown out. Those grapes were later used to make the Cara wine. I never even realized until after all of this had happened. I certainly didn't know about the grapes when I gave that bottle of Cara to Genesis.
Well, to your knowledge, did anyone try the Cara wine before it was given to Genesis?
No, the whole point of gifting Genesis the bottle of Cara was so that she could be the first one to try it. I sampled one sip from the bottle a few weeks before the wedding just to make sure it tasted normal, and it did. But I actually ended up getting a little sick that night. At the time, though, I just blamed it on the sushi I had for lunch.
Why did you only give that bottle of Cara wine to Genesis and not everyone else at the rehearsal?
Well, you see, I had noticed that Genesis likes complex wines, like Cara, with notes of false spices and currants and smoked leather. And I thought that the very first bottle of Cara would just be a really special gift for Genesis. My way of extending the olive branch, so to speak, to my future daughter-in-law.
When did you present that bottle of Cara wine to Genesis?
I presented it at the rehearsal dinner in front of everybody while I was giving my toast.
And what happened after you gifted Genesis that bottle of wine?
Before I left the party, I saw Genesis open it up and pour several glasses in front of everybody, including Casey. I didn't think anything of it, really, but if I had known what was in that bottle, I would have never have risked having it so close to my son.
What happened for the rest of the night after that?
Well, I don't really know what happened after 10:30 because that's when I left. But around 2:30 a.m. That next morning on June 8th, I got a call from one of my employees telling me that someone had been rushed to the hospital.
Do you know who it was that was being rushed to the hospital?
No, I had no idea for sure who it was at the time, but based on how much I'd seen Genesis drink the night before, I suspected it might be her.
So what did you do?
Well, I went to Genesis's room. She wasn't there, but I did see the empty bottle of Cara on the floor, which gave me further evidence to just assume that she had had too much to drink. So I thought everything would be fine, and I went back to bed. But turns out I was wrong. Genesis, she passed away that next morning.
Well, Mr. Martini, to your knowledge, did the police ever conduct a criminal investigation into the death of Genesis?
I know they
Objection, Your
can't.
Honor. Relevance may be heard.
Yes.
Whether or not the police conducted an investigation into the death of Genesis Petrillo makes no event in this case more or less likely. This information is irrelevant.
Your Honor, if I may.
Yes.
Again, this is extremely relevant in today's case as this goes towards causality. The plaintiff is trying to pursue a claim of civil battery. This is extremely relevant to say that if the police conduct an investigation, you will hear Harper Martini tell you that he was never questioned nor detained. That's extremely relevant in today's case to show that there's really no causality here for why Harper Martini's here.
May I respond on those grounds, Your Honor?
Yes.
First, whether Mr. Martini knew about an investigation does not mean one occurred. But further, we are not here talking about whether or not there was a murder. We are talking about civil battery. So to question Mr. Martini about whether or not the police questioned him makes no fact in our case, the facts in today's case, more or less likely. It simply goes to prejudice the jury against detectives that have no bearing on today's case.
I'm going to sustain the objection. If it were relevant, I find that the prejudice would outweigh it.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Martini, how has all of this affected you?
Seeing the way that this has come down on Casey just breaks my heart. This accident has also damaged my business. I mean, I'm on the verge of losing the winery. Other businesses and clients are just cutting ties with us, and my dream is going down the drain. I mean, why would I do something like this to endanger my own business, to endanger my own son? I had no idea that there were pesticides in that wine.
Thank you. No further questions for this witness, and I tender him for cross-examination.
Plaintiff is your witness.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Martini. I'm going to be asking you a few questions. Your son, Casey Soto, is the only remaining family you have?
Yes, my wife died when Casey was very young.
Casey's the apple of your eye?
Yes.
And you believe that Jen Petrillo was a threat to your son. She was a bad influence.
Yes.
In fact, one time Jen Petrillo had Casey drink a little bit too much.
Yes.
And that greatly concerned you.
Yes.
So you didn't like Genesis Petrillo very much.
No, me and Genesis, sadly, we never really saw eye to eye.
In fact, at one point, Genesis told you that her and Casey were moving to France, right?
Yes.
She told you that you would never see your son again.
Yes.
And this was when you realized that Jen Petrillo was the worst mistake of Casey's life.
She was talking about taking my son away from me. So, yeah.
Mr. Martini, this was May 12th, less than a month before the wedding.
That sounds about right. Yes.
Now, you didn't keep your dislike of Genesis to yourself, did you?
I suppose not.
You, in fact, left voicemails for Danny Francasio about Genesis Petrillo?
I did.
And you would recognize these voicemails if they were shown to you in court today?
Yes, I would.
Now, Mr. Martini, the voicemails that you have in front of you, those are the voicemails in question?
Yes.
They are fair and accurate copy?
They look like it, yes.
And they've not been changed or altered in any way?
No.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff offers exhibits 18D and E into evidence.
No objection.
They're admitted.
Now, Mr. Martini, I want to first talk about this voicemail from January 4th. You told Danny Francasio that if someone made a pesticide for Genesis Petrillo, you would pay $1 million for it. Is that right?
Well, that's what I said in the email, yes.
And moving on to the next voicemail, you told Danny Francasio you'd reached a breaking point. It would be you or Genesis, but not both of you. Did I read that correctly?
I was very upset at the time after I received the voicemail saying that Genesis and Casey were moving to Paris. Yes.
This was 4 days after you received that voicemail that they were moving.
Yes.
Now I want to talk a little bit about the Cara wine that you spoke about on direct. You were aware that that Cara wine was for Genesis. That was your intention.
Yes, the point of the Cara wine was to give it to Genesis. Yes.
You gave it to Genesis and Genesis alone.
Yes, it was his gift or her gift.
And Mr. Martini, on the night in question, you were aware that the pesticides you used on the vineyard were lethal, right?
Well, I'm pretty sure everyone knows that pesticides can be lethal. Yes.
But Mr. Martini, you were aware that even a small sip could give you symptoms so severe that you would nearly die, right?
A small sip?
Yes, Mr. Martini.
Well, I took a sip of the Cara and I got a little sick.
But Mr. Martini, you actually had an employee take just a sip of wine that had been contaminated before, didn't you?
Well, that was an open wine glass that was left out while sprayed. There was a lot of pesticides in there.
Mr. Martini, you don't actually know how much pesticide got in there. You just know that they took one sip of wine that was contaminated and almost died from the severity of their symptoms.
Yes, but it was an open glass left out while we were spraying. But yes.
That's a yes to my question. You don't actually know how much pesticide was in there.
Not exactly.
So you were aware that even a small amount of pesticide could cause severe symptoms.
Yes.
And you claim that you were sick after sampling the Cara wine?
Yes.
Mr. Martini, you sampled your own wine, became sick, and as a business owner, you weren't concerned about that.
I didn't think that it was the wine that made me sick.
But as a business owner, you tried your wine, you got sick, and you didn't do anything to check if it came from the wine.
Again, no, I didn't know that it was the wine.
I want to move on to that note that you brought up on direct examination.
Okay.
You wrote on that note to Jen Petrillo you would give her $300,000, or you would take her out of the picture the hard way. Is that right?
That's what the note says. Yes.
You said she had until June 7th.
Yes.
And Mr. Petrillo, June 7th is the day that you gave Genesis that Cara wine.
Mr. Petrillo, yes.
June 7th is the day that Genesis Petrillo was rushed to the hospital.
That was the same day. Yes.
And the morning of June 8th is when Genesis Petrillo died from pesticide poisoning.
Yes.
Now, lastly, Mr. Martini, I want to talk to you about what happened before this case. You were aware that you're being sued for civil battery.
Well, I'm here today. Yes.
And within that complaint, there was actually an investigation done to see if your company violated any business codes in their use of pesticides, right?
I believe so.
Ms. Avery, could you please share the complaint in today's case to the screen? And as a part of that investigation, they found that no practice at your winery violated the use of building codes, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. This is hearsay right now. The complaint cannot be used as an exhibit or to talk about facts in trial. Those are out of court statements being used to the truth of the matter.
Let me take one moment because I'm getting feedback and I'm not sure which person's audio that's from. Could I have our timers pause, I guess, if that's allowed, while I try to get that sorted out? And would each of you mind just starting with plaintiff's attorney? Could you speak first so I can see if it's yours?
Hello.
Okay, that seemed fine. Defense attorney?
Testing.
Okay, and then the witness?
Hello.
Okay, that seems fine. Well, hopefully it's not me. Are you all able to hear me without feedback?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, give me just a moment. I'm pulling up the pretrial order for this case.
Your Honor, the bailiff has it on the screen as well, if that would be helpful.
Yes, thank you. Okay, let's go back on the timer with everyone. And defense counsel, would you state your objection again? You're muted.
My apologies. My objection is the hearsay. Opposing counsel mentioned a complaint in today's case and tried to testify about facts on that complaint. And that complaint is an out-of-court statement being used to assert the truth of the matter.
And your response?
Yes, Your Honor, this is a matter of public record. This would be an exception. But further, I'm just asking Mr. Martini if he's aware that his business passed all investigations about the use of pesticide in compliance with building codes, making it extremely unlikely that institutional cross-contamination occurred.
Your Honor.
And the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Martini, before we conclude, when you found out that someone had been poisoned, you went back to the winery.
Back to the winery?
You went into Peony Estates and went to look in the rooms of the people in question, right?
I only went to one room.
And in Genesis Petria's room, you saw that bottle of Cara wine?
Yes.
You actually ripped the label off and then threw that bottle away, right?
It was an empty bottle of wine on the floor.
Mr. Martini, you were aware that that bottle tested positive for organophosphate pesticides?
I'm aware of that now. I wasn't aware of that at the time.
And after throwing out that bottle, you actually threw out every ounce of Cara wine in existence. Is that right?
Yes.
But you hadn't tested that wine, did you?
No.
So, Mr. Martini, I just want to be clear with the Cara wine. You tried it and became sick, but did not investigate it, right?
Again, I didn't know it was the Cara wine.
Objection, Your Honor. This question has been asked and answered.
Sustained.
Mr. Martini, you gave Cara wine to Genesis Petrio.
Objection, Your Honor. Again, asked and answered.
I'm going to overrule that one.
Sure.
Yes.
Mr. Martini,
again,
you gave it to Miss Petrio.
Again, yes.
And then without testing the rest of all of the wine your vineyard had produced for the year of 2019, without testing it for pesticides, you threw it all away.
Yes.
I pass the witness, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just asked my witness to be allowed to step down.
All right, the witness is excused and the defendant can call their next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Austin Lewis to the stand.
All right. Looks like everybody is there. You may proceed.
Can you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Hey y'all, my name is Austin Lewis.
And what do you do for a living, Miss Lewis?
I'm a winemaker, the same thing that's been in my family for generations. You might even say that I got wine in my blood.
Who do you currently work for?
I currently work at Peony Estates, which is a local winery right here in the Midlands, and I currently hold the position of chief winemaker.
Is Peony Estates the first winery where you have worked?
Actually, it's really not. I did work at Rosie and Pedro's, which is another winery right here.
How long did you work at Rosie and Pedro's?
I reckon about 3 years.
Why did you leave?
Well, I had met Harper Martini, who was also working there with me, and he came up to me one day with the bright idea to start our own winery, and I just had to jump at the opportunity, so I moved over there with him.
What is it like working for Harper Martini?
Well, now, overall, I really do enjoy it. It's real fun, but just like all things, it do come in with its challenges.
What kind of challenges?
Most of it just stems from the fact that we're so close to the Solov swamp, which means bugs, which means we have to have a need for pesticides. And Harper and I didn't always agree on what type to use, but we made it work, turning water into wine and all that.
You mentioned that you use pesticides at Peony Estates. Could you tell us more about that?
Yes, well, at first we had used an organic pesticide, but it just wasn't doing its job. It just wasn't working. So we switched to bug off, a stronger pesticide.
Why else did you switch?
To be honest, the organic stuff was just getting to be a little too expensive for us.
How does bug off affect the crops?
Well, it's in the name. It does just that. After spraying that, there ain't no more bugs. But it don't just kill bugs. It can be extremely dangerous to humans if it is consumed.
Are there any measures you take to make sure the pesticide isn't consumed?
Yes, now every harvest time, we do rope off an area that we deem to be too dangerous.
And what makes some of those crops too dangerous?
Well, our winery is located on a slope, so about 20% of our crops at the bottom of that slope is a real can be highly exposed to these pesticides because that's where it concentrates the most. So we just throw out that 20% of the crop every year.
Whose job is it to make sure the contaminated grapes are separated from the others?
Now, generally, I like to do it, but due to a family emergency in 2018, I was out of town. But Harper.
Your Honor, if we could pause for a minute, the plaintiff's attorney can't hear anything.
Yes, let's pause until we get that resolved.
So my volume just came back on. I'm sorry.
Okay, is it working? Okay, all right. Were you able to hear at the beginning or not at all?
I couldn't hear that last question.
Okay, let's repeat the last question, and if we can credit it at the end with the time if we need to. Is that okay?
Yes, Your Honor. Whose job is it to make sure the contaminated grapes are separated from the others?
Now, generally, I like to do it, but due to a family emergency in 2018, I had been out of town, but I asked Harper to take care of that 20% for me.
Well, let's talk more about Harper. You mentioned that you enjoyed working with him. Could you describe further what your relationship with him was like?
Yes, Harper and I worked together a real long time, from our time at Rosie and Pedro's and then starting up Peony Estates together. So we became pretty close. I got to know his son, Casey, and he did get to know my family as well.
To your knowledge, what was the relationship like between Harper and Casey?
Well, Casey did come around the winery quite a bit, and Harper did express highly his talk of his son. But, things did start to change a little bit.
Here's the answer to the statements of Harper Martini.
Your Honor, there have been no direct statements elicited.
The witness will contain your testimony to your own observations and not testify about statements of Harper Martini in answering this question.
Yes, Your Honor. How did things change?
Well, Casey didn't come around the winery no more, and I did sense Harper did not like Genesis.
Are you familiar with what happened to Genesis?
I was not at Peony Estates when at the time of the rehearsal dinner, but I am made aware what happened. I do know that Genesis unfortunately passed away the morning of her wedding, and I do know that it's also allegedly from consuming some pesticide that had been in some of our wine that night.
And to your knowledge, is this the first time that pesticides have gotten into the wine at Peony Estates?
No, it's not. Back in late 2018, during a spraying that we had around the grounds, a glass of wine had been left out, and unfortunately, an employee drank this glass of wine and became very ill.
How has business at the winery been since what happened to Ms. Petrillo?
To be honest, it has not been that great. We're in what you might call a Great Depression. I'm sorry, I truly am. I make jokes to try and ease the stress.
Objection, Your Honor, relevance. May I be heard?
Yes.
The state of Peony Estates business makes no fact unless more or less likely in this case today, which makes that question and answer not relevant.
Your Honor, may I be heard on those grounds? Yes, Your Honor, this line of questioning goes directly to the intent that Harper Martini could have had today. Austin Lewis is a person that works at Peony Estates and works directly with the defendant in this case. and how this action could have affected the winery goes directly into the intent that could have happened.
I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor. How has business at the winery been since what happened to Ms. Petrillo?
Well, like I said, it's just not been that great. We're not doing too well, and I do hope that this is all over soon because I really do care about my winery and as well as Harper, and I just hope that this can be cleared.
Thank you. I have no further questions at this time, and I tender this witness for cross-examination.
All right, plaintiff's counsel, your witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Lewis, you were forbidden from training employees over pesticide storage after the May 8th, 2019 visit from the health inspector.
Well, yes, I was, but we had thoroughly trained our employees prior.
Okay. Now, Ms. Lewis, Harper Martini is familiar with where pesticides are stored.
Yes, it is his winery.
Your objection to speculation on what Harper Martini is familiar with?
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
Case law Vir Lando establishes that a corporation, I'm sorry, I'm just going to slow down. Case law Vir Lando establishes that a corporation knows all of the facts of its agents, being that Austin Lewis is an agent of Peony Estates and Harper Martini is the owner of that corporation. That is knowledge that Austin Lewis knows as to where pesticides are stored, and due to the logic of the case law, Harper Martini does know the question that I asked the witness. So it would not be speculation.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Lewis, employees of Peony Estates have access to pesticide.
Yes, sir, for our sprayers around the grounds. Yes, sir.
And Harper Martini is an employee of Peony Estates, well, the owner of Peony Estates.
Yes, sir, he is.
And Harper had access to both pesticides and wine at any time before the rehearsal dinner.
Yes, sir.
You are aware that Genesis and Casey got engaged in 2018?
I am aware of that.
And Cara, which was a 2019 wine, was fermenting through 2018.
It was.
So and since Harper was familiar with the location of pesticide, Harper had access to pesticide, which can be poisonous and fatal.
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor, to speculation.
Overruled.
Ms. Lewis, you were not there on the night of the rehearsal dinner?
No, I was not.
In fact, you weren't at Peony Estates at all on June 7th.
No, I was not.
So you cannot attest for the whereabouts of any pesticides on the night of the rehearsal dinner?
No, I cannot.
No. Now I want to talk a bit more about Harper Martini. Harper Martini repeatedly told you that she hated Genesis.
Yes, but you know, just like anybody dislikes something, I personally just can't imagine Harper hurting nobody.
But that was a yes to my question, that Harper repeatedly told you that she hated Genesis.
He did say it a few times, I guess, yes.
And Harper Martini also said that if they could push a button to make Genesis disappear, they would absolutely do it.
That was also said, yes, it was.
Your Honor, I pass the witness.
Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just ask that this witness can constructively step down.
The witness is excused. You can call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Blair Osborne to the stand.
All right, it looks like Blair Osborne has joined. You can proceed with your questions.
Yes, Your Honor. Can you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Hello, y'all. My name is Blair Osborne.
And Blair, what do you do for a living?
Wow, I am just quite shocked you don't know that, sir, but I run a very successful event planning business that I founded back in 2011 to host many intimate affairs for my friends, family members, and of course, church members.
Well, what is Bliss by Blair Events?
Wow, so Bliss by Blair Events is an amazing event planning service where I just, host events like birthday parties, weddings, luncheons, even funeral wakes for people of the Midlands area.
And where do you get most of your business?
I get a large portion of my business at Peony Estates Winery, which is owned by Mr. Harper Martini.
And when did you meet Mr. Harper Martini?
I believe I met Mr. Harper Martini just a bit after Easter of 2015. I met him and his amazing son, Casey Soto.
Now, you talked about planning many events at Peony Estates. What was the most recent event you helped to plan at Peony Estates?
The most recent event I helped plan at Peony Estates Winery would be the wedding of Casey and Genesis Petrillo, and I was very excited to give Mr. Martini and his son the dream wedding I know they would always want.
Well, how was planning the wedding?
It was exhausting, sir. God forgive me, I really hate speaking ill on others, but it felt doomed from the start. Dates got confused, documents went missing, and no, the vendors just kept calling my phone saying, Harper just fired me, should I still show up? Genesis just hired me, when should I meet with you? It was truly just chaotic, sir. But the biggest issue I would say was Harper and Genesis's fighting.
Well, why were Harper and Genesis such a problem when planning the wedding?
Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, they just kept bickering and fussing and fighting. It was quite annoying, but as y'all know, this isn't my first rodeo. So of course I did my best to handle it, but the bickering lasted from the beginning of planning all the way to the day of the rehearsal dinner, sir.
Well, you just mentioned the rehearsal. How were Harper and Genesis at that rehearsal?
Unfortunately, sir, back at it again, bickering, fussing, fighting. I actually thought that they would never stop arguing, but that all changed actually that evening.
Well, what happened the evening of the rehearsal?
Oh my God, sir, you just had to be there. I'm so sorry. Thinking about it just makes me tear up. This was just such a touching moment. So, as y'all know, Genesis and Harper have been fighting like cats and dogs. And during the dinner, Harper just made this beautiful speech. And his speech clearly showed that he was, tired of the fighting and wanted to make amends.
Objection, Your Honor, to speculation.
Sustained.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Blair, I just want to move on a little bit here. When did you actually find out about Genesis's death?
I found out about their unfortunate passing a bit after 10:30 a.m. and I learned about their critical condition around 8:30 that morning. I was actually in Casey's suite. God bless their hearts, they don't know how to tie a tie. And I just remember Angel just rushing in, huffing and puffing, and telling everyone in the suite, what had happened to Genesis. I was in there, a few groomsmen, and of course Harper. And God bless them. Casey and Angel just rushed off to be by their loved one's side. But unfortunately, God decided it was Genesis' time to come home and become an angel.
Now, Blair, after this tragic incident, how has your business interacted with Peony Estates?
Well, everyone knows that my business, of course, comes first. Well, second after God, of course. And I could not associate myself, my successful business, or my clients with a business or a partner that has a bad image. Folks at the church are still talking about the incidents and they are not pleased. So I just distance myself, of course, and I discuss this further on my Bliss by Blair social media accounts.
Now, Miss Osborne, did you ever see Harper poison the bottle of wine that she gave to Genesis?
My word, no. No, sir.
Thank you, Miss Osborne. Your Honor, I have no further questions, and I tender this witness for cross-examination.
All right, plaintiff's counsel, you may begin your questions.
Good evening, I apologize. Good morning, Ms. Osborne. I have a few questions for you on behalf of the plaintiff. So I want to start with how you were retained in today's case. So you were actually hired as the event planner for this wedding?
Yes, sir, I was.
And it was actually the worst professional experience of your life?
Yeah, it was just a lot of fighting and arguing, sir. And, I'm just not one to want to deal with all of that. My business comes first. And,
Thank you. Exactly. It was a lot of conflict constantly, correct?
Yes, sir, it was.
And you actually were there when Genesis and Harper Martini had a fight before the wedding day?
Yes, sir. Unfortunately, I was present during that argument.
And after that fight, Harper Martini told you one of these days, Genesis is going to drink something and it'll kill her.
I do recall her saying something, him saying something like that. Yes, sir.
All right. Well, let's move on to the night in question. So you actually described that as events having reached a boiling point.
Yes, things are just quite tense due to all the bickering, sir.
And it was after that that Harper gave Genesis the bottle of wine.
Yes, the beautiful bottle of Carl wine, sir.
And that Carl wine was different than the wine given to all the other guests?
I believe so, sir. Everyone else received a bottle of Horizon, which I learned recently.
And you also learned the next day that only Genesis Petrillo suffered from pesticide poisoning?
Yes, sir. That morning in Casey's suite.
Thank you, Miss Osborne. Lastly, kind of you touched on this but you didn't see anything related to any of the elements in today's case?
I'm sorry, say that again, sir. It's just
I apologize. I can clarify. You didn't see Harper Martini do anything to the bottle of wine?
No, sir. As far as I can reckon, I never saw Harper do anything with the wine. I was quite busy with the wedding party, sir.
But the wine that was given to Genesis was different from everyone else?
Yes, sir. Everyone else did receive a different bottle of wine.
And this was also you also remember Harper Martini having said that one day Genesis will drink the wrong thing?
Objection, Your Honor, to asked and answered.
Sustained.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, then, I pass the witness.
Thank you, sir. Have a blessed day.
Do you have any redirect for this witness?
No, Your Honor, I have no redirect for this witness, and at this time, the defense rests as case in chief.
All right, the witness is excused.
Thank you, Your Honor. Have a wonderful morning.
Unless, is there anything further from the defense?
No, Your Honor. At this time, the defense rests as case in chief, and we just ask for a brief 10-minute recess.
All right. Does the plaintiff have, does that work for the plaintiff, or would you like a different time?
Time allowing, we will take 10 minutes as well, but if the timekeepers could verify, lovely, then that's fine with us, Your Honor.
It looks like that will work, so we will resume in 10 minutes. Everyone's reminded to keep their audio and video off.
Yes, Your Honor.
I'm just keeping an eye out for our scoring judge. Okay, we have both scoring judges. I can see we have plaintiff's counsel. We'll begin once defense counsel is ready. Andrew or Joshua, after closing arguments, when you all submit your ballots, would you mind asking them to confirm to you when they've been safely received before we close out the Zoom session? Thank you. Okay, I see we have defense counsel, so we will begin now hearing closing arguments from each party. Everyone should put their view into speaker view, and we will begin with plaintiff's counsel.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. Family came first. But to the defendant in today's case, Genesis Petrillo was anything but family. She was a threat. She was taking away her son, and she needed to get out of the picture. While Genesis will never truly be gone, she lives on in the memory of her friends, of her fiance, and of her family. But members of the jury, it is important what we are doing here today in holding the defendant accountable for his actions. Specifically, my co-counsel and I are here on behalf of Ms. Petrillo's estate, suing the defendant for civil battery, which in the state of Midlands consists of 3 elements: an act by the defendant, an intent to cause harmful or offensive contact, and harmful or offensive contact to the plaintiff. And as this is a civil case, we must prove each of those elements to you by a preponderance of the evidence, which means that our explanation is more likely than not. That 51% certainty that Mr. Turner came before you to talk about this morning. And I want to walk through each of those acts that we must prove. First, an act by the defendant. We've established today that the bottle of Carawine gifted to Genesis Petrillo tested positive for organophosphate pesticides. Members of the jury, we were tasked with explaining to you how those got there. We heard from Angel Rodriguez that on the night in question, the defendant was seen handling a can of pesticides and heading towards the kitchen, joking that those pesticides were for pests like Genesis. That's an act by the defendant. Now, the opposing counsel might come up here and tell you, well, they don't have an eyewitness. But members of the jury, I'll remind you, this is not a criminal case. We do not need to prove to you that our explanation is 100% certain. We need to prove to you that it is most likely. And we have done that here today. Now, second, we needed to prove intent. We heard from the defense's own witness that the defendant said, one of these days, Genesis Petrillo will drink the wrong thing and it'll kill her. But who better to speak to the defendant's intentions than the defendant himself? The defense will tell you the defendant was all words, no action, but he took action. Despite caring about his business and needing the wedding to go well, he was willing to pay $300,000 for Genesis Petrillo to get out of the picture. And members of the jury, he told her in no uncertain terms, you need to leave by June 7th, or I will take you out of the picture the hard way. Members on the jury, on June 7th, the defendant followed through. And lastly, we needed to prove harm to Genesis Petrillo. We heard from the emergency room doctor in today's case that there is one cause and one cause alone for Mr. Petrillo's death: organophosphate pesticide poisoning. Not alcohol poisoning, as the defense would have you believe, but our doctor told you that the symptoms Ms. Petrillo exhibited were only consistent with organophosphate pesticide poisoning. And the defense would have you believe that this was an accident, that Peony Estates so blatantly violated safety codes that they were able to contaminate all of their wine. But members of the jury, I want to remind you of what we heard from the defendant. He sampled his own wine, and despite knowing his pesticides were lethal and could have severe effects in small doses, was not concerned enough to do an investigation. And members of the jury, he would have you believe that upon finding out that the child that he didn't, or the child-in-law that he didn't like very much was in the hospital, he threw out every ounce of Cara wine out of an abundance of caution, every ounce produced, the livelihood of his business, before a single person had the chance to test it. Members of the jury, if your whole business was riding on one group of wine, and you found out that wine you'd sampled may have been responsible, you would test that wine before you threw it out, unless you knew that those tests would come back negative and it would be clear that the only poison was in the bottle intended for Miss Petrillo. And I want to remind you of the one person we didn't hear from today. Because while no amount of money will bring Genesis Petrillo back, that does not mean that we should not hold the defendant accountable for his actions. Members of the jury, our burden in today's case was to prove our explanation was more likely than not. And I'll remind you that is not by a preponderance of the suggestions or a preponderance of the possibilities, but by a preponderance of the evidence. And when you consider the testimony and evidence presented in today's case, you will see that in its totality, there is only one most likely explanation. And that is that, as we allege and as we have proven, you must hold the defendant liable for civil battery. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Defense, you'll be heard now.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Go ahead.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. All talk and no action. Throughout trial today, you heard about the tragic death of Genesis Petrillo. And the plaintiff came up here and told you today that that tragedy occurred because Harper Martini hated Genesis and intentionally poisoned a bottle of wine in order to stop a wedding. But members of the jury, the only evidence the plaintiff actually has are comments and a note written by Harper. And you will see that this was all talk and no action. Now, at the beginning of trial today, my co-counsel, Mr. Metcalf, came up here and told you about the burden of proof in today's case. And he told you that in a civil battery case, the plaintiff has the burden of proving to you three things. First, there was an act by Harper Martini. Second, there was intent to cause harmful or offensive contact to Genesis Petrillo. And third, there actually was harmful or offensive contact to Genesis. And they had to prove that to you today by a preponderance of the evidence, meaning more likely than not. And that is a burden that they simply cannot meet because Harper never poisoned a bottle of wine. He was all talk and no action. So let's look at these elements one by one and see exactly how the plaintiff has failed to meet their burden in today's case. Now, first, the plaintiff had to prove to you that Harper actually poisoned a bottle of wine. But members of the jury, at no point in trial today did the plaintiff actually tell you how that bottle of wine was poisoned or when that bottle of wine was poisoned. And furthermore, not a single witness in trial today actually told you that they saw Harper put pesticides in that bottle of Cara wine. Not a single witness saw Harper open or even tamper with a bottle of Cara wine. And that's because it didn't happen. Now, the plaintiff had Angel Rodriguez take the stand today, who told you that they saw Harper walking towards the kitchen holding a can of pesticide. But let's be clear. Angel doesn't know what Harper did with that can of pesticide. In fact, you even heard today that Harper told Angel that that can of pesticide was for a cockroach. Angel never saw Harper put pesticides in a bottle of Cara wine. Now, sure, Harper may have made jokes about Genesis being a pest, but that was all talk. There was no action. And the plaintiff has failed to prove this element to you today. Now, the second element the plaintiff had to prove to you today is that Harper actually intended to poison and harm Genesis. But not a single witness today testified and told you that Harper knew that that bottle of Cara wine was contaminated. And that's because they didn't know. You see, the plaintiff is trying to weave this really unlikely tale that because Harper hated Genesis, that he was willing to poison a bottle of wine in order to stop a wedding. But does that really make sense? I mean, consider these three facts that are supported by the evidence today. First, you heard today that Harper loved Casey more than anything in the world. And the plaintiff even told you that family always came first. So does it really make sense that Harper would be willing to risk losing Casey in order to harm Genesis? I mean, you even heard today that that bottle of Cara wine was a gift for Genesis in order to fix the relationship. Now, second, you heard Harper and several other witnesses today tell you that Harper gave that bottle of Cara wine to Genesis in front of everyone at the rehearsal dinner. But if Harper truly intended to cause harm to Genesis, then why would he do it in front of dozens of witnesses? Doesn't it seem much more likely that he would do that in private? And furthermore, why would he give a contaminated bottle of Cara wine to Genesis when his own son Casey was sitting right next to her? Does it really seem likely that Harper would be willing to risk the life of his own son if he knew that bottle of wine was poisoned? And finally, why would Harper jeopardize his own business? You heard today that other than Casey, Peonia Estates meant more than anything to Harper. So does it really seem likely that Harper would be willing to lose his business because of a disagreement he had with Genesis? I mean, the plaintiff actually wants you to believe that Harper was willing to throw away his entire life in order to harm Genesis and stop a wedding. But there is no evidence to prove that today, and the plaintiff has failed to prove this element to you as well. Now, the third element the plaintiff had to prove to you today is that the act of poisoning that bottle of wine is what actually caused harm to Genesis. But the plaintiff couldn't even get to the threshold of this element. Sure, that bottle of Cara wine may have been contaminated, but Harper did not purposefully poison it, nor was contaminated wine given to Genesis in order to cause them harm. Harper played no role leading to this tragic outcome. Now, as the defense in today's case, we did not have to prove anything to you today. We did not have to call a single witness or show you a single piece of evidence, but we did. And our witness's testimony points towards what actually happened. Today, you heard from multiple witnesses that Peonia Estates uses chemical pesticides to combat the pest issues at their winery. And you heard Austin Lewis today tell you that they spray these pesticides directly on their crops, and that every year, 20% of their crops become too contaminated with pesticides and have to be thrown away. But in 2018, Austin Lewis had a family emergency and wasn't able to throw those contaminated grapes away. And Harper told you today that he had no idea that those contaminated grapes had not been thrown away. He had no idea that some of those contaminated grapes had accidentally been used in the production of Cara wine. You heard today that Cara was a brand new unreleased bottle by Peonia Estates, and Genesis was the first to try it. And finally, you heard from Blair Osborne today, who told you about the aftermath of this tragedy. And she told you how despite a long, prosperous partnership with Peonia Estates, she had to cut ties with them for her own self-preservation, and that Harper was on the verge of losing everything. Now, we may never know exactly how that bottle of wine became contaminated, but it is clear that Harper Martini did not do it. And when you go back into that deliberation room and look over all of the evidence, I want you to ask yourselves, which explanation of these events seems more likely? Is it more likely that Harper was willing to throw away his entire life, losing his business and losing his son Casey in order to harm Genesis and stop a wedding? Or is it more likely that some contaminated grapes accidentally made its way into the Cara wine? I'm sure Genesis may not have liked, or Harper may not have liked Genesis, but Harper would not tamper with his product's own wine in order to harm Genesis. And that is why I am confident that when you go back into that deliberation room and look over all of the evidence, it'll be clear that the plaintiff has failed to meet their burden in today's case. And that is why I ask that you find Harper Martini not liable, because he was all talk and no action. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Rebuttal from the plaintiff.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed? And members of the jury, opposing counsel has just come up here and told you that Harper's son was more important to him than anything. And we agree that the Harper family came first. But the defendant was not only trying to stop a wedding, but stop his only son from being moved across the ocean where you would never hear from him again. And opposing counsels also said that the defendant was all talk and no action. But I'll remind you, the defendant was willing to pay $300,000. That's an action to get Genesis Petrillo out of the picture. And when it didn't work, members of the jury, the defendant took Jen Petrillo out the hard way. Now, lastly, opposing counsel has tried to tell you that the defendant loved his business so much, why would he do something to threaten it? But members of the jury, if he loved his business so much, he would prioritize his wine. He would teach his employees proper protocols. And instead of throwing out wine haphazardly without testing it to be sure that that was the cause, he would test it and see, did that wine need to be thrown out? Because members of the jury, the defendant's business is a winery. To have no wine from 2019 would be detrimental. Unless he wasn't throwing out the wine out of an abundance of caution, but because he knew that he needed to cover his tracks. Now, members of the jury, in today's case, family came first. And to the defendant, Genesis Petrillo was anything but family. We have met our burden and proven our explanation more likely than not. And we ask that when you go back in the deliberation room, you consider the evidence and that you find the defendant liable for civil battery. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. The scoring judges are now going to submit their ballots, and I'll ask everyone to stay on the Zoom meeting until their ballots have been submitted and confirmed received. And then once that happens, we will give you some brief comments.
Your Honor, would you like everyone to post up on screen for assistance with the ballots, or are we good? I'm sorry.
That would be great. Thank you. All right, we're just waiting for them to get confirmation. Okay, Joshua tells me we are confirmed and we are good to go. We'll keep our comments brief. I know this is your I think this is your last thing for the morning, now early afternoon. Scoring judges, do you want to provide any comments directly to the advocates?
Yeah, I'll start. I'm Joshua Upham. I'm a 3L at Pepperdine Law School, and I've been doing mock trial for probably almost 10 years now, competitively. First off, the main takeaway I had from this round was really phenomenal job by all the witnesses. I've gotten to see a number of these competitions, especially with this problem, and I thought that the witnesses really on both sides were the best I've seen so far. So great job across the board on that. Like our presenting judge said, I'll try to keep my feedback really brief. I did want to just especially point to Mr. Giller, who played Casey Soto. I thought you did a phenomenal job, both on direct and cross, of staying in your character and staying super believable and really picking your battles on cross-ex. As an expert, it's super important to do that to keep your credibility up, and I thought you did a great job of that. For Mr. Hewitt on the direct examination of Angel Rodriguez, I wish you had sat on those lines about "I will make you disappear" and some of the threatening language a little bit more. And I also wanted to suggest you had a line that was from the witness when she was afraid for her life. based on my understanding of the facts, I think you may be able to get that in under an unavailable witness exception, because there's an exception specifically for imminent fear of death. It's 804B2 when the witness is unavailable. I don't know if you have a stipulation on her availability or something like that, but I would definitely consider that, because I thought it was a great statement and I would really try to find a way to get it in. For Hamin Kwan, I thought you had just really great content. You had a bunch of great statements, like it's antithetical to anything other than organophosphate poisoning. At one point on cross-examination, you said treating her for anything else would be unethical. Super credible language, super strong for your side. So just really great job on that. For the cross by Miss Turner, the only thing I would change is I wish you had made the bias point at the end of your cross a little bit earlier, so that it would kind of color how I see the rest of her answers, because she has pretty good answers on cross. But the bias point about her wanting to see this case have a certain outcome, I think would be a lot more effective if you put it at the beginning. For the rest of the witnesses, I didn't have anything that stood out except to be really careful about the gender, especially if it's someone who in the case you would be very familiar with. Be careful about that. I realize mistakes happen. And one thing that I always try to get my teams to do is to just move on. Don't correct yourself. Don't draw attention to the mistake if you've made it, but just keep going with your points. One more thing for you, Mr. Hewitt, and really anyone else who's going to use case law. I love it when people use case law in objection battles. It's kind of difficult on Zoom. And one thing that I did in one of my competitions was to put the case law up on the screen so that the judge has immediate access to it and doesn't have to like flip through the bench binder to get to it. If the rules allow it, I would really consider doing it for case law and even for some really nuanced sections of the FRE that maybe the judge isn't familiar with or doesn't have to deal with all the time. But overall, great job by everyone. And I didn't really have any comments on the closes. I thought they were solid, except for that on the rebuttal. I thought you had a really good point about finally saying, did they do this out of the abundance of caution, or were they really covering up the fact that their wine was contaminated? I was glad you finally came through and said that. Great job and good luck going forward.
Okay, Andrew.
Yeah, so my name is Andrew Patterson. I'm a 2L here at Baylor Law. I've been involved with mock trial for quite a while now, competed and coached the undergrad team. I wrote a lot of comments on my comment sheet, so I just got a couple like big picture things, I think, for both sides. One, for attorneys, when you're in an objection battle, and it's like super nitpicky, but don't say like, I believe, or, I don't see how that's relevant. Like, as a judge, and this might just be a me thing, but like, I don't care what you believe, or like if you don't see that how something is relevant. I care whether or not something actually is relevant, or whether like foundation actually has been laid. So like, I don't care about your beliefs. I care about the law and like what's actually been said. But that's nitpicky thing. I thought y'all otherwise did a pretty good job with objections. And then the other thing, I've seen this quite a few times with relevance objections. Personal preference, I don't think that they usually work well on cross-examinations, especially like if you think the other side is asking your witness irrelevant questions, like let them waste their time. They don't have much time anyways. So just kind of like a strategy thing. I also think that like usually they don't work too well on cross-examination. The one exception, I thought plaintiff Faith, I thought you had a really good one about the criminal investigation point. I did like that relevance objection on cross. And then for witnesses, try to cut out the, like honestly, or to be honest, or, I'll admit, because what that seems to suggest is like, you aren't being honest the rest of the time. Like, why do you have to like emphasize now that you're being honest? Are you not being honest in your other answers? So I don't think that you don't get any sort of extra credibility or any bonus points by being like, well, I'll admit, or, well, I'll be honest. If anything, I think you just stand to lose potential credibility when you say those. Again, like these are small comments. I think y'all otherwise did a very good job. Like this is definitely the best round that I've judged from this tournament so far. So great job to all of y'all today.
Questions from any of our advocates? Anything you'd like insight on, other than echoing what everybody else said about being very impressed with your performances today? I don't really have anything to add unless you want to ask me something.
I have a quick question. So if we're wanting to use hearsay exceptions, do we need to lay more foundation before we use them? Is that sort of what you were hoping for, or did you just not think that the statements in question met the exceptions we were citing?
So in this case, what I've seen a lot of is trying to get the doctor's statements in under the exception for, and this may not be what you were talking about, but for the medical treatment and diagnosis. And I think I view that more as being somebody is going to be truthful when with a doctor when providing information in order to get accurate diagnosis and treatment. So I've seen that a lot where people have tried to put in the doctor's statements. I'm trying to remember which other hearsay objections we had during this round. Do you remember?
Our big one was Miss Petrillo saying she was worried that Harper would hurt her. And I think we tried to say it was an then existing mental condition that she was stating her.
Yeah. So for that one, I think that what kind of pushed me to sustain that objection was that I think the witness said not just that she was afraid, but that she thought she was going to kill her. And that it was that second piece that I thought, okay, you saying you're afraid, that is your present your present state. You saying what you think somebody else is going to do, to me felt like pushing it a little bit, and it was almost like I was giving it a 403 thing. Even if that was what she was feeling, it's too prejudicial given what's going on in the case to let her say, I'm afraid and I think somebody's going to kill me.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I liked during one of your experts things, you guys used a demonstrative, and that's nice. They're always scary because you never know how they're going to go, but when they work, they're very effective. I thought that was helpful to see how the symptoms aligned with different possibilities. And Jessica, I thought you did a very good job on your cross-examination or on your examination of the witnesses. I thought that went well. So, all right, we'll let you guys get to it unless there's anything else.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Of course.
Thank you,
Y'all
Your
keep
Honor.
having fun. Keep doing well.